Space expeditions went to planet Earth every 1,000 years or so. Remember, time is irrelevant everywhere else in space. These exploring ships would bring back samples of life forms that were developing and continuously monitor the direction they were evolving in. They were put in laboratories and their evolution speeded up so that the explorers knew, eons before it happened, what man would eventually look like. The speed up of evolution was done by artificially inseminating evolving man with their own genes. This is where the saying that we were made in God's image came from. When the spacemen first landed on the biblical third day to do the first explorations, this is where they set down their ship. It was a huge mothership brought on this excursion for the purpose of a long-term stay for the astronauts to live in. The animals that saw them were frightened of this huge monster and all left the area. They finally tempted a few with food to come near them, ready to destroy them if they turned on them. These few were males. They needed to catch the females, but could not contact them. They had to finally set traps. This was when the first genes, the pure strain, were injected into the race. The divine sparks entered the bodies for the first time after the third round of inseminations took place. This would be the fifth day, biblically speaking. This was the time of Lemuria. It finally was determined, through trial and error, that 2 generations needed to pass before the next mating took place. So the time from the beginning of the first matings to the days of Lemuria was more like 6 generations. The Garden of Eden came about 3 generations later to give added help. This is the beginning of recorded history in the Bible. The biblical passage, "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder," was given by the spacemen as applying to the breeding experiments between the sons of God and the sons of man, and that now that it had been accomplished, it never could or would be undone by anyone. This mating that the spacemen were talking of has been misinterpreted as being a mating between humans. It was incorporated into the marriage ceremony due to misinterpretation, not as a deliberate act to control people. This was the actual start of human beings, where spiritual and physical evolution met. Humans, meaning half animal, half man, were created when the divine spirits began to enter the refined animal forms to learn and experience the animalistic nature of Earth so that they would have control of Earth. They have finally realized that they cannot control the nature forces of the planets, but can learn to control the nature forces, the animal nature, of the forms, or bodies. The 7 soul rays were sent down after the 5th round of inseminations approximately 50,000 years ago. This was considered the Lemanian stage, which lasted about 10,000 years and was followed by the Lemurian stage at approximately 40,000 years ago. This was followed by Atlantis approximately 30,000 years ago. The thought forms had been just floating around waiting after their first try at entering bodies. They had quite a long wait. It took about 3 rounds of inseminations, waiting a couple of generations between each round, before the forms were really refined to the point where Michael, the Oversoul, thought that his children could try it again. Eventually, humanity developed into the stage termed the Atlantean stage, and the 6th chakra, the third eye, developed. This 6th chakra was due in part to man's deviousness, cunning, and manipulation, and also due to the disuse of the solar plexus. When they wanted to know what others were thinking, they used their imagination to visualize what the other person was thinking, trying to second-guess each other. This led to daydreaming and more visualization and imagination. This in turn led to the 6th center, the third eye. The stage of Atlantis was a mess. Even Michael himself could not control it. He had lost all control. Those animal men, those cavemen, had no thought as far as anyone else went. Having both parts, male and female, in the same body, made for not only very wise, knowledgeable, creative entities, but at the same time created many warped minds with twisted sexual appetites and weird sensational ways of appeasing them. In the same body were genius qualities and at the same time the most retarded in this one area of development, the sexual drive. Michael felt he had to do something. He decided that he was going to almost have to start over again, only with the refined caveman instead of clear back to the early animal. At the time of Atlantis, he asked for help again from an even older brother who had gone on to another galaxy. This brother sent help in the form of storms that practically destroyed this beautiful Earth. But Michael had to have this done because the cavemen were going to destroy it themselves if he didn't do it, so he cleaned it up. The most advanced of the cavemen and the most advanced of the animals were saved, and he started his creation over, the biblical story of Noah and the ark. This was the time when Atlantis disappeared. The most evolved humans were in Atlantis at that time, and the loss of this civilization would have been a major setback for planet Earth. The people were removed over a period of 50 years or so. The seventh round, seventh day biblically speaking, began with the birth of Jesus approximately 2,000 years ago and is still underway. Do you think this will be the end of the inseminations? How do you think the 8th chakra will be added? By another round of inseminations, and the 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th will also be accomplished the same way. It is all part of the plan for planet Earth. The divine sparks were whole, male and female, until the powers were stripped from man with the restructuring of the human form. This took place when it was determined that both parts of the entity were not to be allowed to surface on the earth at the same time, the biblical story of Adam and Eve. This was the fall of man referred to in the Bible, and was caused by the devious behavior of mankind at this time period, mostly deviation in sexual behavior. Beginning at this time, half of the divine spark was all that was allowed to enter the form. The other half had to stay on the inner planes and control the half that went into the body. Help for the developing human continued to come in from Lucifer's brothers. This was in the form of nutrition for his restructured creation. Up until the time of the 6th day, when the restructuring was done through the chakras, the animal men were not advanced enough for any nutrition to help with intelligence. But by the time Atlantis was destroyed, the spacemen needed to know if superior nutrition would help create a more thinking, reasoning human. Thus, experiments with nutrition had been started. On the 6th day of creation, the spaceships came from outside our solar system. Some came from Clarion and some from Edentia, which is where the man Eden came from, the planet Edentia, to start the experimental garden. The biblical land of Canaan, the promised land, was the Garden of Eden. They were one and the same thing. As man evolved out of the ape stage and started walking upright, the ships would bring certain foods and chemicals to use on selected specimens, leaving them in their natural environment, but giving them this special help. As given, the Garden of Eden was an experimental growing station for producing more highly nutritious fruits and vegetables than the earth was able to produce at that time period. By this time, the conscience in man had started developing. The garden was begun at the same time as the restructuring because it was realized that this nutrition was going to be responsible for a large part of the refinement of the forms on this planet Earth. The garden was a huge mass of land that managed over a period of about 300 years to really increase the brain capacity of these humans. The garden was located in a country known as Israel. It was a large plot of ground near the Sinai Desert that was irrigated with a tremendous irrigation system, bringing water from the distant Nile River. The pipeline followed the river until the point where it meets the Jordan, then crossed at this point into present-day Israel. There is still evidence of this system to be found if excavation were made at strategic points. On the eastern bank of the Nile River in Egypt, near the town of Bethlehem, there is a masonry standard that bore the weight of the pipes carrying the water as it was siphoned out of the river. The irrigation system used was quite elaborate for its day, having these pipes of sheepskin crisscrossing the growing station with punctures in them and the ability to close the water off at the top of the hill. There are several of these pipe bags preserved in a cave in a hillside near the town of Judea. If evidence is wanted or needed, a dig could be done there. Eden stabilized the crops and did the most he could. After 300 years of trying and experimenting, he had pretty much come up with the right combination in his seeds, the right hybrids of seeds, and so on. These seeds were given out, and the tribes planted them, but they didn't do it scientifically. They planted the same crops over and over again in the same fields and drew all the nutrients from the ground in that one area. Then they would move on to another area, and after practically devastating that piece of territory, they'd move on to another. This just kept going on. It's still going on today. This is what has happened in present-day Africa. The earthmen who ate from the garden did indeed receive knowledge, but of course not from the biblical single bite of an apple. It was a process covering many generations. It was also found that with the addition of seaweed, the process of thinking was speeded up even more. The biblical tale of Jonah and the whale. It was thought that the best way to use the food from the sea was by eating the seaweed itself. The astronauts tried to tell the people that by eating the fish they would get the same results, that the fleshy part of the belly of the fish was a reservoir of selenium, which is the chemical that is found in seaweed. Can you imagine trying to get unevolved man to understand this concept? The house of David was one of the 7 original tribes known as the Jewish race. This is why they were called the chosen race. They were chosen, but there was no particular honor in being chosen. In fact, there was a good deal of sadness because some of the family units of the original tribe were broken apart. The split of the group broke up families, which left a heart-wrenching sadness in these animal men. The 2 halves of this tribe had all received the same genes, but one group was chosen to be the benefactors of the experimental garden, the other group not. This also was what instigated the practice of circumcision. So in case one of those outside the garden tried to have his way with one of the women in the garden, she would know immediately that he was not one of her kind and could protect herself from his advances as best she could. If he had his way with her anyway, the baby was destroyed. The space fathers wanted nothing contaminating the half of the tribe that was kept in the experimental garden. The half of the tribe put in the garden was a tribe called the Amorites. They were from the house of David. They were eventually released from their bondage and told to go into the world and mix with all the others. They went across the land bridge and into America, but they were not the Indians. They were the survivors of Lemuria and eventually mixed and mated with the Indians. There are still a goodly number of them in Egypt and are the instigators of the fighting there at this time. This is called the Aryan race today, this half of the chosen tribe. The other 6 original tribes, along with the half of the tribe of David removed from the garden, are the biblical lost tribes of Israel. They were considered lost as far as the spacemen were concerned, not lost in a literal sense of the word, only in a spiritual sense. The captain had driven them out of the garden, which was, remember, an experimental garden for aiding evolution. He had to have a test case to compare against those helped by the garden food. More help had been called in from other planets, and the other races were started. All the races became mixed, and many shades of all colors began to appear. At this time, the other 6 tribes mixed with the half of the tribe of David not allowed in the garden, and the spacemen lost their test case. This was the Jewish race. They stayed true to themselves for many centuries, for several generations, so the spacemen still had a fairly accurate testing for approximately 6 generations. For this reason, it has unwittingly been an ongoing experiment.